I can't stop thinking about what we did to the hunters. I know it's justifiable, but I see them when I close my eyes. Doing what we did to living people after taking their weapons, it haunts me. I see every bloody bit, every broken bone, every bashed in skull. They did what they did, but we mutilated those people, made the others watch as we went through them, one by one. I just can't stop thinking. I don't think Carl could even look at me. Not after what I've done. Not if he knew.
Hello and welcome. Today, I would like to talk to you about the darkest chapter in The Walking Dead. For the uninformed, who am I kidding? With a series that has like 6 television spin-offs and 5 games, and not counting the additional episodes within each Telltale game, and references within other games and media, including Invincible. I'm pretty sure everyone and their mother's mother know what The Walking Dead is, but I'm curious how many of you know where The Walking Dead originated from? If you're unaware, like many I've spoken to, The Walking Dead is a black and white style comic not too dissimilar to the show. In fact, the show ends up expanding on smaller parts of the comic for good or bad. But today, we're not talking about the show. I am talking about the comic that released on October 8th, 2003. But before I can dive deep into this chapter, I need to add context. Starting within the prison, during this arc, one of the characters, Alan, ends up losing his life to a zombie attack, and as a result, leaves both of his sons, Ben and Billy, now orphaned. At some point, Andrea and Dale take them and effectively become their adopted parents. If you're familiar with the prison arc in the show, then this is already massively different, and I'm not gonna deep dive into every single difference between the show and the comic every time something that doesn't happen in the show happens in the comics. So I'm going to try to keep that at a minimum to keep the video going. So shortly after the prison, but before the Alexandria arc, Rick, Carl, and Michonne are all disheveled and broken. You see, Rick has lost Lori and Judith to the governor's assault on the prison. He literally was running and turned around and watched his wife get her guts blasted out along with her child in front of him. And he's beaten. He doesn't want to be the leader that the group had him as before. He's lost pretty much everything, and he just is so done with it. The only thing he cares about at this point in the story is the well-being of Carl, who is kind of going through his own thing, but we'll talk about that when it pops up. We've never seen him this broken before. The closest we got was shortly before the attack on the prison. I believe he was seriously contemplating leaving, but ultimately he stuck it out and held his own for as long as he could. And unfortunately, that led to the death of a lot of people, and that broke him. He is no longer the leader that we know him as. He doesn't want to lead the group around. He only cares about the well-being of his son. During this, Michonne and Rick let Carl sleep as they kind of just talk outside the car about what happened at the prison, because Michonne wasn't actually there for parts of it. And luckily, Glenn and Maggie stumble upon them on their horses and eventually lead them back to the farm where Dale and Andrea and the kids are. Around this time, Dale and Rick have a sort of heart-to-heart moment. They sit down and talk about what happened at the prison, talk about the decisions Rick had to make and how Rick just deeply regrets not coming to the farm when Dale and Andrea and, the whole group split off during the prison. But Dale mentions something interesting, and I think this is a really good moment for Dale. He says, "You don't know what could have happened while we weren't here. For all we know, a horde of zombies might have just burst through here and, walked through the area." So I think Dale is making a good point, and he's just trying to get Rick to be like, hey, you don't need to just give up because some shit happened, and you have Carl, you have someone to take care of. You can't be giving up on Carl when, you still are to some degree a leader. You're still his father. I'm not gonna let you just sit here and grovel in misery. And Rick just says, whatever you decide, that's what we're doing, basically. He's like, if we're staying, we're staying. If we're leaving, we're leaving. So this is where I really want to heavily instill into the audience that Rick doesn't want to be a leader. He is in the mindset of, the only thing I care about is taking care of Carl. I am not going to tell other people what to do. I am not going to make sacrifices for the group. The group can do what they want. I'm going to take care of Carl. That is his whole mindset during these next few chapters and a little bit until the Alexandria arc. and it's very depressing to see him here. We haven't seen Rick this broken and destroyed really ever in the comic, and if you're a manga reader, then you could probably relate this to Guts shortly after the Dark Moon arc. I just refer to it as the Volume 13 arc. I don't really remember what the name of it was, but I very much remember Guts being destroyed and broken during the events of that and after. I remember one of the most heartbreaking moments was him just running away crying, because we've never seen Guts run away, let alone really cry in the manga. So seeing Rick in a similar state is genuinely heartbreaking to see. And even though Rick is very much a broken man, there's still a thread of his character keeping him together. Not long after this, Abraham and his group arrive on the farm, and they're like, hey, you can't just be in a stationary location firing your weapons, and you need to just like straight up leave and be a nomad, travel on the road, like get out of here. And I have issues with the comics in this regard. I feel like it's very irritating that the characters are in a weapon scarce and ammo scarce world, but they are still very much using their weapons and ammo, and it's like, dude, you can't even make ammo at this point. Why are you using it the amount that you are? So Rick and his group decide, yeah, that's a good idea, let's go. Sometime on the road, Rick mentions to Abraham that they're actually pretty close to a police station where he has a key and can access the arsenal inside, and that he didn't actually take all of the firearms back then, so there should be plenty left. At this point, the group is going to be split up in a couple different ways. Glenn, Maggie, and Michonne will be staying at the gas station that they're currently, resting at, with Dale, Andrea, and their kids staying at a farm not far up. They feel like that it's actually safe enough for them to go to the farm, and since they haven't seen any walkers or zombies, they're like, oh, hey, it's definitely safe here, even though that's definitely not how that works. On their way to the police station, it eventually becomes night, so Rick and his small group ends up resting for the night, but they get ambushed by a couple of people. The people who watch the show would recognize this scene, but it's under a little bit of a different context. Rick is held down while he watches these men grab at Carl and do the things that we don't want them to do to Carl, and Rick is just like groveling on the ground, begging him. He's like, please don't do this. And as soon as he sees like Carl's pants get pulled down, he like headbutts this dude, and he's like ready to attack him, and they kind of like grab him around the arms, and so he can't use his arms at all. He's just totally helpless to punch or hit or anything, and he's face to face with them, and he does the thing that everyone here would do. He bites into their neck. This is one of the coolest moments in the comic. This was the moment where I'm like, this is Rick Grimes. This man who will do anything to protect him and the people he loves. He refuses to be cut down, even in the lowest of the low that he's been. He is literally, at this moment in the story, the lowest he's ever been. The only thing he started caring about after the prison is Carl and Carl's well-being. And when that's starting to be taken away from him, he loses it. And this reminds me of the scene out of 28 Days Later where, Buddy is like going through the motions of being a survivor. He's being like someone new to this world to being a survivor, then kind of going full feral mode. And that's sort of the whole arc that Rick goes through in the Walking Dead comics. Rick bit into this guy's neck and he's just bleeding out on the ground. Abraham shoots the guy who was holding him down. Rick picks up a knife and chases the remaining Buddy down and just fillets him. The next day, Rick and Abraham are having a conversation about what happened that night, and Abraham mentions that in one of his survivor groups, he found out that someone was abusing his daughter. That made him just rip the dude apart with his bare hands, and it scared his family so much that they left in the middle of the night without him knowing, which is extremely tragic. It's a really good storytelling too, because Rick and Abraham aren't too dissimilar. They're both very much leaders, and like I said, even though that Rick is very much not wanting to be a leader, he's still doing things that a leader would do, and he's clashing with Abraham in similar ways. A little bit after this, Morgan appears, and he looks like he's lost something important to him. And if you haven't guessed it by now, Morgan's son passed away. Unfortunately, though, Morgan didn't put his son down. He has him actually chained up, a little bit like the governor with his daughter. There's this like kind of running theme so far in the comic of like kids being orphaned or dying or going through traumatic events that no kid should have to do. I think it's an interesting way to look at the contrast of what kids do nowadays compared to what they have to do to survive. It's not you playing outside and having fun, playing Go Fish. It's you having to shoot someone who is attacking your dad, much like Carl in the beginning of the comics and TV show. Rick hands Morgan a gun and tells him to put his son out of his misery. And outside the house, you hear a loud bang and then see Morgan with a stone face walking out. We get a couple panels showing that he didn't put his son down, that he just shot the chain to loose him. At surface level, this is just Morgan not being able to do the deed, and I don't think there's many people who would. It would be hard to put down your son and, put a bullet through his brain, but this isn't his son, and he's been living with this thing for, you don't know how long. I think we have an idea. I think Morgan does mention, but you don't have an exact amount of time. He's been living with this monster that is literally just wearing his son's face. They make it to the police station and get their supplies, and on their trip back, they stumble upon a massive horde of walkers. It doesn't go good for them. They end up crashing their car and running into a farmhouse. They're barricading windows, they're barricading doors. It isn't looking good for them. Thankfully though, Carl found a blender and Morgan also finds some batteries, so they end up making sort of a monkey bomb device for the walkers to be attracted to. There's also a really sad moment in this farmhouse when Morgan goes upstairs to find batteries for the blender, where the whole family is just dead. They were likely poisoned, and Morgan says it looks like he drilled into them and then blew his own head off. So like I said, there's this running theme so far of just tragedy among families and tragedy among children in particular. Repeatedly in this comic, children are witnessing things that no child should ever witness. So this is where the arc of the Hunters really begins. In the next few moments, there's a panel of Ben sitting over a cat with a knife in his hand, and he has a cat splayed out. So he, murdered this animal, and I'm sure you know where this is going, especially if you've watched the show. Killed the cat, and he's basically playing with dead bodies at this point. So we have this sort of frame of mind that this boy is definitely gonna do some bad things later on in this chapter. It is setting up total horrific events to happen. Rick heads over to the farm that Dale and Andrea are staying at, and he's like, hey, there's this horde of zombies that will kill you if you stay here. And Dale is like, no, it's not gonna do anything. We'll just stay inside the house. And Eugene mentions a really good point here. He says that they're not smart. They don't do things the way you and I do things. If one of them scrapes a door, they're like, oh, something that made a noise. There must be something in there. And other zombies, because of those zombies, will start gravitating to that wall. So Eugene is like, you don't want to stay here. They will kill you. You will die. You and your kids will die. It's safer to be with us. Dale is just kind of going against a little bit of what he said to Rick. I feel like he doesn't really understand the whole gravity of the situation. He reluctantly agrees to go with Rick and the group, and they are now making it on the road and heading to DC, because the whole idea with Eugene is that he's a scientist and he knows how to basically stop and cure the infection. On the road, during one of their breaks, Andrea is looking for Ben and Billy, and unfortunately, she finds both of them. One of them being deceased, and Ben is sitting over his brother with a knife, saying,
"Don't worry, he's going to come back. I didn't hurt his brains."
Now you may be saying, that's the darkest part? No, that's not. I'm telling you, it gets darker than this. That's really sad. That is very disturbing and sad. And like I said, I'm gonna keep bringing up this theme of kids doing things that they shouldn't have to, or kids doing things that no kid should do in general in this comic, because Robert Kirkman knows how to write characters really well. Later that night, the adults are talking and Andrea is shouting in Ben's defense. Dale is angry that, this even happened to begin with. Andrea says,
"He doesn't even know what he did. When I put him in the van, he didn't understand why he had to be there. He doesn't even know."
To which Abraham replies,
"That makes him more dangerous."
Not long after this, following up with,
"If this kind of thing happened in the real world, before all this madness, He'd get what, 20 years of therapy? He'd be sent off to some kind of home for the rest of his life, and even then, they'd probably never fix him.
Rick asks,
Jesus, Abraham, what are you suggesting?
and Abraham,
You know what needs to be done.
So the group is like totally broken up about what to do with Ben. They do not have the knowledge or know how to take care of the situation, and keeping Ben with them while they sleep is a risk. There's no way to guarantee their safety in sleep. Sure, they could lock Ben up every day, but is that really humane to do to a child? Is that the right thing to do? And even if they were to do that, how long until they feel like they can trust them again? Or how long until one of them slips up and Ben gets to them? This is really good dark storytelling, and if you're willing to think it through, you have some serious questioning to do. And you're not going to be happy with some of the outcomes you might think of. Regardless of what actions you would take, Carl glares at the reader. The group has some downtime during this, and Gabriel comes across them and welcomes them into his church, but they're, obviously very reluctant to trust strangers. Later that night, Dale and Andrea are talking about what to do. Dale at this point has zero faith in this group outside of Andrea, and you may think Ben as well, but when she asks if they should sleep in the same van as him, he says he doesn't know. See, while all this is happening, Carl sits up, leaving his hat in his bed so that it looks like he didn't leave, sneaking past Glenn, and he opens the doors to where Ben is sitting, and Ben asks,
Are you scared of me?
and Carl says,
No.
The group wakes up and sees what happened, and everyone is looking for the culprit at this point. Dale has just lost both of his kids in the span of days. I can't imagine the kind of heartbreak he's going through at the moment, but more importantly, this is a huge moment for Carl. The last time we saw Carl take a life like this was in the beginning of the series, and it was very immediately necessary for him to do. He was a boy watching his father be attacked by Shane and shot in the defense of another person. He was very immediately shaken after doing so as well. Here, Carl just sits and stares over the two graves of the deceased boys. We can't really tell how Carl is taking the whole situation, as there's no inner monologue being said, so he just appears to be unshaken at the moment. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit. Eventually, Dale is attacked by some zombies while walking away from the group, but they come to rescue him, and he's holding his shoulder. Later that night, he gets up and just disappears, being taken without a sign. Andrea is now just destroyed, having lost both her kids and her faux husband at this point. During her moments of just breaking down, she's standing on the field in front of the church. She's just staring out into the woods, and she feels like she's being watched by someone. This is around when the reader gets Dale's perspective. He wakes up with a man hovering over him and introduces himself as Chris. Says he probably comes off as a crazy person. He goes on to say that the good news is he's not dead yet, but not to read too deep into that, because that's how they do things here.
We play the hand we're dealt. We don't want to hurt you. We didn't want to pull you from your group, scare you like this. These things aren't things we want to do. They're things we have to do. So I promise you, none of this is personal, but at the end of the day, no matter how much we detest the ugly business, a man's gotta eat.
Now showing Dale with his remaining leg being amputated and cooking in a fire. So we kind of get a perspective for these cannibals that they feel like they have to do this, that they may detest it, but that doesn't change the fact that they're still doing it. And this is going to be one of the other running themes throughout this part of the Walking Dead comics, is that there are people who will do really, really bad things and just find ways to justify that. And that's a real thing that happens in real life, unfortunately. Plenty of people do bad things or things that maybe they didn't have to do, and they just find ways to justify it. The next chapter opens with the hunters chowing down on Dale's leg, talking about how he tastes better than they thought. And they also go on to talk about the different types of meat and how some of them feel like women taste better, and just the darker parts of cannibalism. Dale starts crying and then laughing, and they initially are like, "What are you laughing at? We just cut off your leg. Are you insane?" And he says,
You think I'm stupid? Why do you think I was walking off on my own? Why do you think I was leaving? I was going off on my own to die.
He then reveals that he was bit. I love this part of the Hunter's arc. When you see Dale holding his arm after he was attacked, you most certainly knew he was bitten, but probably forgot about it because the bigger concern soon became Dale being kidnapped and cannibalized. It's a pretty good subversion of the reader's expectations. The revelation forces the hunters to all spit out their food and panic over what's going to happen to them, and Chris is just like, dude, we cooked the meat, we're not going to be like sick, like just chill out. He's trying to make sure his group is staying in order and not panicking, because their whole shtick with how they hunt people is they scare the shit out of groups of people and they just kidnap them one by one. They pluck it like, a flower. You pluck the petals off of a flower until it doesn't have petals anymore. The hunters decide that seeing Dale in his current state would scare the survivors in Rick's group enough to start making mistakes and allow them to be picked off one by one. Unfortunately for the hunters, Rick's group has been through hell and hasn't even come back yet. So when they find Dale laid out on the field, Rick quickly understands that they're being watched and starts shooting cover fire in the direction that he thinks he can see the hunters, leading them to return fire back and striking Glenn in the leg. Outside of Glenn being hit, everyone makes it back to the church safely, including Dale, having brought him in. That, was the whole point of him going out there. Rick starts shouting at everyone to get on the ground and to get away from the windows so that they, don't get hit by any stray bullets or glass or, anything like that. But Abraham is quick to mention that they only shot one bullet and it hit Glenn in the leg. So clearly, whatever their intentions are, it isn't to kill Rick's group. Alongside this, we have Dale's testimony confirming what the hunter's intentions are. Continuing this, Dale informs Rick that all he can make out about his surroundings was a picnic table and houses on either side of him. So Rick makes a decision for the group. He picks Michonne, Andrea, Abraham, and Gabriel, the latter due to his intimate knowledge about the area. So Abraham is really reluctant to do this. He says they don't have any idea who these people are and what they're capable of. But Rick says,
"Wrong. We know a lot. We know they've stayed in the shadows, watching us, not attacking, so they don't think they can overpower us. We know they only shot Glenn in the leg, so they want us alive. We know they want to scare us, to keep us from thinking rationally, planning. We act like scared people, we play right into their hands. Scared people don't go to their attackers. We're doing what they'd least expect."
Abraham still doesn't want to go. He doesn't think that they can find them effectively, and Rick is like, dude, did you hear a horse? No. Did you hear a car? No. So they're on foot. Which, makes sense. And with Gabriel knowing the area very well, he says that it's probably the 3 neighborhoods surrounding them. By this time, the hunters are sitting over a table and they're planning their next moves. They're talking about how they can scare the group enough to actually get them to start making the bad decisions that they are. One of them mentions that they saw a group of the survivors leaving the church and they didn't follow them because they thought that they were just fleeing, which that would make sense if the hunters made it this far just by picking people off one by one, and they are very familiar with how the survivors in general just work, then it makes sense that they wouldn't go after these people, and they might have also been lured into a trap for all they know. So Chris says
"They're probably shitting themselves right now."
And Rick, like a total badass, walks out of the woods saying,
"Not exactly."
This is an extremely bold move by Rick, but he already knows that they won't shoot him on sight, so he just confronts them, having a smug talk with the leader of the hunters, and he asks Chris one question.
"Just came to ask you this. Any amount of talking going to get you to back off? Will you stop coming after my people?"
I'm internally screaming over this. This is just the moment that Rick reestablishes himself as the leader again. Chris says,
"In all honesty, probably not."
Holding his arms spread out, displaying the group of hunters who are all ready to feast on their next meal. Rick inquires as to why the hunters are cannibalizing people, and Chris just says, in all honesty, we got hungry. But then he goes to mention instances of cannibalism within nature, and he tries to sort of justify it to Rick, but I feel like it's just him justifying it to himself. He never really ever talks about how he would try to grow food or scavenge supplies in grocery stores, or maybe even just kill people and take their supplies. He always just says, we're bad hunters. As soon as you set up nest and you miss one shot, the animals are gone for miles. And it's just more him justifying it in his own eyes. And a part of me also feels like Chris likes it. The way he talks about it and his facial expressions while doing so, it all sort of comes off as like the dude does enjoy it. And one of the last things Chris says here with a tear in his eye is that they had a lot of children with them when they started out. So I just want to keep this framing that Chris has all these people sitting around and staring at Rick as their next meal. He is confident that Rick is just alone and that his people from his group fled in other directions in desire to escape the hunters. Chris says,
I hate to say it, but it's me or you, and whenever that's the situation, it's very easy to choose me, no offense.
Rick replies with,
No, I completely understand. I have to make the same decision, and let me tell you, I've chosen me. The problem for you is that I have the advantage.
Rick tells Chris,
You didn't really think I came here alone, did you?
The hunters all jump out of their seats, guns drawn in random directions, but Chris calls Rick out as bluffing, and Rick just casually holds up his hand in the shape of a gun and says,
Andrea, big guy, left ear.
Should I mention that Andrea is a fantastic shot and it's been established since the beginning of the series? Rick follows up with telling the hunters that if it moves, it gets shot off. Abraham steps out and Chris stupidly points his finger at Rick and says, I only see two of you. Now Chris is on the ground crying, begging Rick not to kill him, and he says, What are you gonna do to us? And Rick says,
Don't really know. Still thinking that over. Won't be good, I can promise you that. Maybe we'll carve off a piece and have ourselves a taste.
The hunters are no more due to 8 vertical panels displaying the actions that Rick took tonight. At some point, the survivors are justifying it to themselves and Rick, saying that they had to do it, that they would have kept coming after his group if they didn't do what they did. And Rick just quickly says, no, that's not true. We didn't have to do it the way we did it. He could have just execution style killed all of them, but they basically were one bite away from being the hunters themselves. Rick leads them all back with their heads hung low, no doubt in shame of what occurred the prior night. I like to note that Gabriel is noticeably further from the group, and I know that's likely because he's mortified by what he witnessed here, but there's some interesting metaphorical distancing between his time out in the world and theirs. He was holed up in the church for so long and he had so much food that he didn't want to starve himself. So when people would come knocking at the steps of his church, he wouldn't let them in and he would hear them being ripped apart outside. Rick immediately hugs Carl upon his return with a smile on his face. Not that he's happy for what he's done, but that Carl is the light of his world. He's not entirely tainted in the same way Rick is. He then makes his way to Dale and has one last conversation. This is one of the heavier conversations that Dale has with Rick, where Dale says,
I want to thank you for being the leader of our little group, even when we didn't want you to be. It was never about control. The decisions you had to make, the consequences of those decisions, none of us were prepared to carry that burden. Nobody wanted the responsibility. You didn't want it, but you took it just the same. I have to admit, I thought you were dangerous. I blamed you a lot for what happened, but sitting here at the end, thinking back, it's easy to blame you for what happened at times, and that's your burden for taking control, for taking care of us strangers, trying to protect us. It's not easy to give you credit for the things that didn't happen. A lot of people are dead, but look how long this group has lasted. I think that's your fault too. You helped me last this long, gave me time I had with the boys, Andrea, and I appreciate that very, very much. So thank you.
I'm not gonna lie, that's in the script for me to say I'm about to cry, but I still am. This is the 5th time reading it, and I tear up every single time I've read this. This is a really big moment for Rick. He just did unspeakable actions to the hunters and views himself as a lowly evil person, but he just had someone on their deathbed thank him for being his leader. And ultimately, this is the moment where Rick regains his lost humanity. No, I'm not going to make a Dark Souls joke. A little bit after this, in the middle of the night, we hear a gunshot. And the next day, they bury Dale. Glenn notes that Dale would have hated this, and not for any other reason than just not wanting to be a burden. While staring out in the distance, Rick hears rustling behind him, assuming it to be Abraham, saying,
He resisted things that I deemed necessary. He wouldn't allow himself to be completely changed by his surroundings. I thought that made him weak, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe he was strong to resist those urges. Maybe he was stronger than any of us to hold on to his humanity and refuse to let it go. What we've done to survive, sometimes I feel like we're no better than the dead ones.
And slowly, Rick turns around to face Carl with tears in his eyes, and Carl says,
I killed Ben.